as he polished off the last of his morning coffee. The bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of another customer. It was a familiar sound, one he had grown accustomed to over the years, yet he never failed to seize the moment to make a biting remark. As the door swung open, an elderly woman stepped in, holding a worn-out Bible in her hands. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson, here to get your car fixed or to spread more of that holy nonsense?" Jake chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag as he stepped forward. Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, Jake, you know I come here for both. My car needs a little divine intervention today," she replied, her voice gentle yet firm. Jake laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the shop. "Divine intervention? You'd need a miracle for that heap of junk. Let's be real, it's just a hunk of metal. You can pray all you want, but that won't fix the engine." He gestured dismissively toward her rusty sedan, not bothering to hide his disdain. Mrs. Henderson sighed, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "You know, Jake, faith isn't just about fixing cars, it's about hope. Something you seem to have lost," she said, placing a hand on the counter as if to reach out to him. "Hope? Ha!" Jake scoffed, leaning back with a smug expression. "Hope is just a crutch for the weak. Life is random, and we're all just ants scurrying around. You're better off accepting that. Now, what seems to be the problem?" As he examined her car, his mind whirred with thoughts of how easily he could dismiss the beliefs of those around him. To him, faith was a joke, a relic of a bygone era that had no place in the modern world. He had seen too many people use it as an excuse to avoid responsibility, to blame their failures on fate instead of their own choices. His hands worked deftly, but his mind was far from the task at hand. Instead, it was focused on the evening ahead. Later that day, Jake found himself at O'Malley's bar, surrounded by a group of friends. The dimly lit establishment buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Jake, ever the center of attention, regaled his friends with stories of his latest exploits, each tale more exaggerated than the last. As the drinks flowed, so did the bravado. "Listen up, everyone," Jake declared, raising his glass high. "I'll bet a round of drinks that I can prove God doesn't exist. Life is just a series of random events. No divine plan, no higher power, just chaos." His friends erupted in laughter, their faces lighting up with amusement at his audacity. "You're on, Jake," one of them shouted, a teasing grin spread across his face. "How do you plan to do that?" Jake leaned back, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Just watch. I'll live my life like it's a game of chance, and I'll show you how nothing ever changes. No divine intervention, nothing but luck." He took a swig of his beer, reveling in the cheers and jeers from his buddies. But amidst the laughter, a voice emerged from the shadows. "You might be surprised, Jake." The woman who spoke was a stranger, her presence commanding despite the casual atmosphere of the bar. She had striking features, with dark hair cascading over her shoulders and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You think you know how life works, but you haven't seen the full picture." Jake turned his gaze toward her, intrigued yet dismissive. "And you are?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Sarah," she replied, her expression unyielding. "And I'm just saying, life has a way of throwing curveballs. Don't be so sure of yourself." "Curveballs, please," Jake scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Life is simple. You play the hand you're dealt and make the best of it. There's no cosmic puppeteer pulling the strings." Sarah raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by his bravado. "You might think that now, but life has a way of humbling those who are too arrogant," she countered, her voice steady. Jake felt a flicker of annoyance at her challenge, but he brushed it off with a laugh. "Arrogance? I call it confidence. You'll see. I'll prove you all wrong." He raised his glass again, this time aiming it at Sarah. "To the randomness of life." As the night wore on, Jake's bravado only grew bolder. He boasted about his invincibility, recounting moments where he had escaped danger unscathed, as if daring fate to challenge him. But deep down, a nagging thought echoed in his mind. What if she was right? What if life was more than just a series of coincidences? The thought was quickly drowned out by the music and laughter around him. He felt invincible, as if he were untouchable. After all, he was Jake Thompson, the man who scoffed at the heavens and defied the odds. Later that night, Jake climbed into his car, the cool leather seats embracing him as he revved the engine. The thrill of the evening coursed through his veins, and he felt an adrenaline rush as he sped down the empty road. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow on the asphalt. As he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling of invincibility. He pushed the gas pedal down further, the engine roaring in response. He was free, alive, and nothing could touch him. The world blurred past him, a kaleidoscope of darkness and light. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye, a deer darting across the road. Time seemed to slow as Jake's heart raced. He swerved to avoid the animal, the tires screeching against the pavement. The car spun out of control, and a moment of panic surged through him. In a whirlwind of chaos, he felt the impact as the car crashed into a tree. Silence followed, a heavy stillness enveloping him. Dazed and shaken, Jake crawled out of the vehicle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He checked himself for injuries, relief flooding through him when he realized he was unharmed. Just luck, he muttered to himself, brushing off the fear that had gripped him moments before. Nothing but luck. He stood there for a moment, the reality of the accident sinking in. Adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but he felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. As he surveyed the wreckage of his car, the thrill of invincibility began to fade. He had always laughed at the idea of fate or divine intervention, but now, standing in the darkness, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to life than he had ever considered. Yet as quickly as the thought arose, he dismissed it, chalking it up to coincidence. With a dismissive shrug, he climbed back into his car, the adrenaline still pulsing through his body. Just another reckless adventure, he said to himself, a forced smile creeping onto his face. He started the engine, the familiar roar echoing in the night. He was Jake Thompson, and nothing could hold him back. The morning sun streamed through the grimy windows of Jake Thompson's mechanic shop, casting a warm glow over the grease-stained floors and cluttered workbenches. Jake was in high spirits, recounting the events of the previous night to his buddies Donnie and Rick, who were leaning against the counter, sipping coffee. As he animatedly gestured, his laughter echoed off the walls, a sound of bravado that filled the space. "Can you believe it?" Jake exclaimed, a smirk plastered across his face. "I swear I saw a deer jump right in front of me. I swerved like a maniac and bam, right into that ditch. I thought for sure I was a goner." He chuckled, shaking his head. "But hey, I walked away without a scratch. Guess I'm just too lucky for my own good." Donnie, his eyes twinkling with amusement, leaned forward. "Or maybe you just drive like a madman, man. That's what you get for thinking you're invincible." "Yeah, well," Jake replied, waving a dismissive hand. "Luck has nothing to do with it. I'm just smarter than the average Joe. I mean, have you ever seen someone as good at dodging trouble as me?" Rick chimed in, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. "You sure that's not just overconfidence, Jake? You're playing a dangerous game." Jake shrugged, brushing off the warning. "Dangerous? Please. It's all just random chance. Life is one big gamble, and I'm rolling the dice like a pro. I'll take my chances any day." He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, his smile unwavering. Just then, Sarah, the woman who had challenged him the night before at the bar, walked into the shop, her presence a stark contrast to the carefree banter. Jake felt a flicker of irritation at the sight of her. She always seemed to show up when he was having a good time, like a storm cloud hovering over a sunny day. "Morning, Jake," she said, her tone measured as if she were weighing her words carefully. "I heard about your little car crash. You're lucky to be alive." Jake scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Lucky? Or just skilled? You should have seen it. I was like a stunt driver in those action movies." He laughed, but Sarah's expression remained serious. "Laugh all you want, but you really need to start taking life more seriously. You can't keep pushing your luck forever," she warned, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "You might end up regretting it someday." "Regretting what? Having a little fun?" "You need to lighten up, Sarah. Life isn't about worrying all the time." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's about living on the edge. Sarah shook her head, concern etched across her face. Living on the edge doesn't mean ignoring the consequences. You're not invincible, Jake. You need to realize that. Yeah, I get it. You believe in all that fairy tale stuff. I don't. I believe in facts. And the fact is, I'm still here, aren't I? Jake shot back, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. He turned back to his friends, hoping to shift the focus away from her. Hey, Donnie, remember that time we went off-roading and nearly flipped the truck? Now that was living. But Sarah didn't back down. You can joke all you want, but life doesn't care about your bravado. One day you'll realize that you can't just ignore the truth forever. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Jake feeling irked and confused. He glanced at Rick and Donnie, who exchanged uneasy looks. Dude, you might want to listen to her, Rick said quietly. I mean, it's not just about you. What about the people who care about you? You keep tempting fate, and one day it might bite back. Come on, guys, I'm fine. I've been through worse. I'm not some helpless kid who needs a guardian angel watching over him. Jake's voice rose slightly, the irritation bubbling to the surface. I can handle my life just fine. As the day wore on, however, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with small things. A wrench that went missing right when he needed it. A tire that inexplicably deflated as he was about to leave for a job. Each incident was minor, but they stirred a sense of unease deep within him, like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. What's going on with you today? Donnie asked, noticing Jake's distracted demeanor as they worked on a truck together. You seem off. I'm fine, just fine, Jake snapped more harshly than he intended. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the irritation. Just a lot on my mind, that's all. You sure it's not that girl? Sarah? She's got you all twisted up, Rick chimed in, attempting to lighten the mood. Maybe you should take her out for dinner or something. Clear the air. Sarah? No way. She's just a buzzkill, Jake replied, a bit too vehemently. I don't need her or anyone else telling me how to live my life. But as he said the words, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He quickly brushed it away, unwilling to entertain the thought that maybe, just maybe, she had a point. The day dragged on, the odd coincidences piling up. Jake slipped on a patch of oil, nearly falling, and later found himself spilling a soda all over the workbench, a series of mishaps that seemed to conspire against him. Each time his friends watched with growing concern. Man, you really need to take a break, Donnie suggested, finally breaking the silence that had settled over them. This isn't like you. You're usually way more careful. Jake laughed, though it was forced. You guys are overreacting, I'm fine. I just need to keep my head in the game, that's all. Can't let anything slow me down. Slow you down? This isn't about speed, man. It's about being smart, Rick said, shaking his head. You're one step away from a big disaster. Jake waved them off, irritation flaring in his chest. Whatever. I'm not some fragile little thing that needs to be coddled. I can take care of myself. I'll prove it to you. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the shop, Jake felt an unsettling sensation settle deep in his gut. He had never been one to believe in signs or omens, yet the strange occurrences and his friends' concern gnawed at him. He brushed it aside, determined to keep his bravado intact. After all, he was Jake Thompson, the invincible mechanic, the master of his own fate. But as he left work that day, a chill danced down his spine, and for the first time he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, fate was weaving a different narrative for him, one he was completely unprepared for. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Jake Thompson's modest workshop, casting stripes of light across the cluttered space. He was bent over a car engine, his hands deep in grease, but his mind was elsewhere. The earlier events of the week had left him feeling unsettled, particularly the letter that had arrived unexpectedly in his mailbox. Remember, every action has a reaction, it had read. He had laughed it off, dismissing it as a prank or perhaps a misguided attempt at philosophical insight. Yet, the words lingered, nagging at the edges of his consciousness. Hey, Jake, called out Tommy, one of his regular customers and a good friend. "You hear about that new diner opening up downtown? They say they have the best pancakes in town." Yeah, Jake replied, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm too busy to care about pancakes, Tommy. I've got engines to fix." He tightened a bolt, the sound of metal clanging echoing in the workshop. Tommy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're always too busy for everything. When was the last time you did something fun? You're turning into a hermit, man." Jake shot him a sideways glance, his expression a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Fun? What's that? I'm too busy proving that life is just a series of random events. You know that, right?" Tommy chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, keep telling yourself that. Just don't come crying to me when you end up alone with your engines." Jake rolled his eyes, but inside, a flicker of doubt ignited. He brushed it off, focusing on the task at hand. Yet, as the day wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling. The strange coincidences continued, the missing tools, the minor accidents that seemed to plague his daily routine, and he was beginning to feel like a character in one of those absurd comedies where everything goes wrong. Later that evening, sitting alone on his couch with a beer in hand, Jake replayed the events of the past week in his mind. The careless mistake that cost him a major account at work, his girlfriend's frustrated departure, all of it seemed to point back to an unsettling truth he had long ignored. He was the architect of his own chaos, and yet it was easier to dismiss it as mere bad luck than to confront the possibility of deeper consequences for his actions. As he downed the last of his beer, a sudden urge to escape washed over him. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, deciding to take a trip to the nearby forest. It was a place he often visited as a child, somewhere he had found solace among the towering trees and the gentle rustle of leaves. As Jake drove, the familiar landscape of his childhood rolled by, memories flooding back, days of adventure, laughter, and a sense of belonging that now felt like a distant dream. The forest was quiet when he arrived, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. He stepped out of his car, inhaling deeply as he felt the weight of the world begin to lift, if only slightly. Wandering along the winding paths, Jake marveled at the beauty surrounding him. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting playful shadows on the ground. For a moment, he felt like a kid again, free and unburdened by the complexities of adult life. As he walked deeper into the woods, he found a clearing where he used to play. Memories washed over him, and he couldn't help but smile. Yet that smile faded as he recalled how far he had strayed from the carefree days of his youth. He sat down on a fallen log, feeling a mix of nostalgia and regret. "What happened to me?" he whispered to the trees, though they offered no answers. His thoughts turned to the letter again. The words echoed in his mind, haunting him. Every action has a reaction. Was this some sort of cosmic joke? He had spent years mocking the idea of a higher power, and now he was left feeling like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the tranquility of the forest. Jake's heart raced as he turned, half expecting to see a wild animal. Instead, it was just a squirrel, darting across the ground in search of food. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head at his own jumpiness, but the laughter felt hollow, a reminder that he was truly alone in his thoughts. As dusk began to settle over the forest, Jake decided it was time to head back. The path seemed darker now, the shadows stretching ominously around him. With each step, he felt increasingly aware of the solitude wrapping around him like a thick blanket. He quickened his pace, the sound of twigs snapping underfoot echoing in the silence. By the time he reached his car, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the world around him was cloaked in twilight. He slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The thoughts that had been swirling in his mind now crystallized into a singular realization. He was angry. Angry at the universe, at himself, and at the people who had left him behind. But beneath that anger lay a flicker of fear. Fear that he was losing control of his life in ways he couldn't comprehend. As he drove back into town, the streets felt foreign, illuminated by the harsh glow of streetlights. He passed the familiar diner where Tommy, had mentioned the pancakes, and it struck him how disconnected he felt from everything that once brought him joy. The laughter of friends, the warmth of companionship, it all seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by his arrogance and disbelief. Pulling into his driveway, Jake sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door of his home. It felt like a prison, a place that highlighted his isolation rather than offering comfort. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to scream, to vent the frustration that had been building inside him like a pressure cooker. But he remained silent, paralyzed by the weight of his own arrogance. Inside, he flicked on the television, trying to drown out the silence with noise, but the mindless chatter of a reality show did little to ease his troubled thoughts. Instead, he found himself staring blankly at the screen, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. Was he truly as invincible as he had always claimed? Or was he in fact just a man teetering on the edge of something much darker? As the night wore on, Jake felt the exhaustion of his internal battle wash over him. He crawled into bed, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating the choices that had led him to this moment. Deep down, he sensed that something had to change, but the question remained. What would it take for him to finally confront his beliefs and the life he had built on the shaky foundation of skepticism and arrogance? In that moment of vulnerability, he felt a flicker of hope, a whisper of possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to rewrite his narrative. But as sleep finally overcame him, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real journey was only just beginning. The forest was thick with towering trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze as Jake Thompson pushed deeper into the underbrush. Each step he took felt heavier, as if the weight of his recent failures bore down on him. The air was cool, and the scent of damp earth and pine needles filled his lungs. He had come to this place searching for solace, a retreat from the chaos that had become his life. As he wandered aimlessly, he stumbled upon an old, abandoned church hidden among the trees, its weathered facade cloaked in ivy and shadows. Curiosity piqued, Jake approached the building. The once proud structure now appeared forlorn, with broken windows and a door slightly ajar, creaking softly as he pushed it open. Peering inside, he was met by a scene that felt frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the wooden pews that lined the aisle. Time had seemingly forgotten this place. "Wow," Jake murmured to himself, stepping cautiously inside. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the bustling life he had left behind. He walked further in, drawn to the altar at the front, the remnants of what must have been a vibrant community, now just a memory. As he looked around, an unsettling feeling settled in the pit of his stomach, a sense of solitude that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. He brushed his fingers along the back of a pew, feeling the rough texture of the wood beneath his touch. "This place, it's like it was waiting for someone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled at his own absurdity, shaking his head as he moved toward the altar. But as he reached the front, something caught his eye, a small, dusty Bible lying on the altar, its leather cover cracked and worn. Jake hesitated for a moment. He had spent years mocking the very idea of faith, dismissing it as a crutch for the weak. Yet here he was, standing in a forgotten church, staring at a book that symbolized everything he had ridiculed. With a mix of curiosity and skepticism, he picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hands, the pages fragile and yellowed with age. He opened the Bible, the pages crackling softly, and began to flip through. Scanning the verses, he stumbled upon passages that struck a chord within him. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he read aloud, the words echoing in the empty church. He paused, each word resonating with the feelings of loss and confusion that had been swirling in his mind. "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." "What does that even mean?" he muttered, brow furrowing as he continued reading. He found himself lost in the words, feeling an unexplainable pull toward the messages of hope and redemption. It was as if the verses were speaking directly to him, challenging his long-held beliefs. He flipped to another passage, this time about forgiveness, and a pang of guilt shot through him as he thought about his recent actions, the people he had pushed away with his arrogance. Suddenly, the tranquility of the moment shattered as dark clouds rolled in overhead, cloaking the church in shadow. A low rumble of thunder echoed through the forest, causing Jake to look up, startled. The storm had arrived with an unexpected ferocity, the wind howling through the trees. Realizing he needed to find shelter, he hastily shoved the Bible back onto the altar and stepped away. But as he turned to leave, he lost his footing on the wet floor. "Ugh!" Jake exclaimed as he stumbled, his ankle twisting painfully beneath him. He fell to the ground, cursing under his breath as he clutched his injured foot. The pain shot through him like electricity, and he winced, struggling to sit up. "Just great," he groaned, frustration boiling within him. Of all the places to get hurt? As the storm raged outside, Jake leaned against the wall of the church, trying to catch his breath. The world outside seemed to explode in chaos, lightning illuminating the forest in brief flashes, followed by the deafening crack of thunder. Alone in the dimly lit church, he felt a wave of vulnerability wash over him, a feeling he had long avoided, masked by his bravado and skepticism. "Why does this keep happening?" he muttered to himself, wincing at the sharp pain in his ankle. "I thought I was invincible." The irony of his situation didn't escape him. Here he was, a man who had spent years scoffing at the idea of consequence, now facing the fallout of his own choices. As the rain began to pour heavily against the roof, Jake found himself lost in thought. Memories of his reckless behavior flooded his mind, his dismissive laughter at others' beliefs, the way he had pushed away the people who cared about him, all in the name of proving a point. "What was the point?" he asked aloud, his voice echoing in the empty space. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall, feeling the coolness of the stone against his skin. In that moment of stillness, he allowed himself to reflect on the choices he had made that had led him to this moment. The laughter of his friends felt distant now, as did the thrill of his reckless bets. What if I'm wrong?" he whispered, the thought creeping into his mind like a shadow. Jake hesitated, wrestling with the notion that perhaps he had been too arrogant, too dismissive of the very essence of faith and connection. The Bible lay just a few feet away, and he felt an inexplicable urge to reach for it again, to delve deeper into the words he had so easily mocked. But the pain in his ankle throbbed, anchoring him to the reality of his situation. He could hear the storm outside growing more intense, the wind howling like a wild beast. "I can't stay here forever," he thought, glancing toward the door. "But if I leave now, what will happen? What if I get hurt again?" The vulnerability he felt was foreign and uncomfortable, a stark contrast to his previous bravado. With a deep breath, Jake pushed himself up onto his good foot, wincing as he put weight on the injured ankle. He took a few tentative steps, testing his balance. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, frustration bubbling within him. "I can't let some stupid storm keep me captive." As he hobbled toward the door, he cast one last glance at the altar, where the Bible remained open, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze that had begun to sneak in through the cracked window. "Maybe I'll come back," he thought, though he wasn't entirely convinced he would. With a determined shove, he pushed the door open, bracing himself against the gust of wind that rushed in. The storm was fierce, rain pelting down like bullets. Gritting his teeth, he stepped out into the chaos, the world around him swirling in shades of grey. Each step felt like a battle, but he pressed on, a flicker of uncertainty igniting within him, a question that would linger long after he had left the church behind. "Maybe there's more to this than I thought," he whispered to himself, the words lost in the storm as he made his way back into the forest, the shadows of his past trailing closely behind him. The storm outside raged violently, whipping the trees and sending rain lashing against the old church windows. Inside, Jake Thompson sat on the wooden pew, his mind racing. The words he had read from the Bible earlier echoed in his thoughts, mingling with the cacophony of thunder. Each booming sound felt like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the chaos of his own life. Suddenly, amidst the howling wind and rain, Jake began to hear voices. At first he thought it was merely the storm playing tricks on him, but as he listened, the voices grew clearer, more distinct. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of the church, whispering ancient secrets of faith and redemption. He looked around, half expecting to see someone else there with him, but the church remained empty, save for him and the storm. "Why am I hearing this?" Jake muttered to himself, rubbing his temples as if trying to physically push the thoughts away. "It's just noise, just my imagination." Yet the whispers persisted, urging him to listen, to feel. As he sat there, a figure slowly emerged from the shadows at the rear of the church. An elderly man with a long white beard and deep-set eyes stepped into the dim light, his presence commanding, yet gentle. Jake's heart raced as he instinctively tensed, unsure of what to expect. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "What do you want?" The old man smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with an understanding that transcended words. "I am Moses," he replied, his voice steady and calm, contrasting sharply with the tempest outside. "I have been watching you, Jake. Your journey, your struggles, they've not gone unnoticed." Jake scoffed, dismissing the man's words. "Watching me? Why would you waste your time? I'm just a mechanic in a small town, and faith is nothing but a joke to me." Moses slowly approached, his gaze unwavering. "And yet here you are, alone in this forgotten place, wrestling with your doubts and fears. You may not realize it, but you are at a crossroads, my friend." Jake shifted uncomfortably on the pew, feeling exposed under the piercing gaze of the old man. Crossroads? What do you know about my life? You don't understand anything." His voice rose in frustration, anger bubbling just below the surface. Moses took a deep breath, his expression softening. "Jake, I understand far more than you think. I have walked the path of disbelief, much like you. I have faced my own storms, both literal and metaphorical, and I have learned the importance of humility and faith." "Faith?" Jake laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty church. "Faith is for the weak. I make my own choices, my own fate. Life is just a series of random events. There's no grand plan, no divine hand guiding us." The old man nodded slowly, his demeanor still calm. "You say that, yet you cannot deny the strange coincidences that have followed you. The accident, the mistakes, the breakdown of your relationships, they all point to something deeper, something you are unwilling to confront." Jake clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "You don't know me, you don't know what I've been through." He felt the familiar sting of vulnerability creeping in, and he hated it. How could this stranger challenge everything he believed without even knowing him? Moses continued, undeterred by Jake's outburst. "You are right, I do not know your life story. But I do know that every action has a reaction. Your arrogance has led you to alienate those who care about you. Your refusal to acknowledge a higher power has brought you to this moment." Frustration bubbled over in Jake. "So what? You think I should just believe because you say so? Because it makes my life easier? Life is hard. It's unfair. I refuse to bow down to some invisible force that doesn't care about me." Moses stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "It's not about bowing down, Jake. It's about recognizing that you are not alone. There is strength in humility, in acknowledging that we are part of something greater than ourselves. Your life has meaning, even if you cannot see it yet." Jake turned away, his heart pounding in his chest. "You don't get it. I don't need anyone or anything. I can handle my life on my own." But even as he said it, doubt began to creep into his mind like a shadow that refused to leave. "Can you?" Moses asked quietly. "Can you truly handle the weight of your choices alone? Or are you simply afraid of what happens when you let go of control?" Jake stared at the floor, the old wooden boards creaking beneath him. The storm's fury outside seemed to echo the turmoil within him. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I've always thought I had it figured out, but maybe you've been running from something," Moses interjected gently. "Running from the pain of vulnerability, from the fear of failure. But embracing faith doesn't mean giving up. It means opening yourself up to possibilities you have yet to imagine." Jake's heart raced as he considered the old man's words. Could it be true? Was he really running from something deeper? The idea made him uncomfortable, yet it also sparked a flicker of curiosity within him. "Tell me," Jake said, his voice steadier now, "how do I change? How do I embrace this faith you keep talking about?" Moses smiled knowingly, as if he had anticipated this question. "It begins with humility, Jake. Acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that it's okay to seek help. It means embracing community, allowing others to support you, and being open to the mysteries of life." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of Moses' words settling on his shoulders. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough?" "Strength is not about never falling," Moses replied. "It's about rising again and again, learning from each stumble. Faith is a journey, not a destination. You must take the first step, even when the path is unclear." The storm began to subside outside, the sound of rain transforming into a gentle patter. The air in the church felt different now, charged with a sense of possibility. Jake looked up at Moses, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know if I'm ready," he confessed, vulnerability creeping into his voice again. Moses placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his grip firm yet reassuring. "You don't have to be ready, Jake. Just be willing to take that step. The journey of faith begins with a single choice to believe in something beyond yourself." As the last of the storm passed, a soft light began to filter through the stained glass windows, illuminating the dusty church in a warm glow. In that moment, Jake felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. Perhaps this was what he had been searching for all along, a chance to confront his fears, to redefine his beliefs, and to embrace the possibility of change. "Okay," Jake whispered, the words escaping his lips almost hesitantly. I'll try to believe." Moses smiled, a deep sense of satisfaction in his eyes. "That's all anyone can ask of you, Jake. Just take it one step at a time." And as Jake sat there, the last remnants of the storm fading away, he felt the weight of his past begin to lift, replaced by a glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. As Jake's hand rested on the church door, he hesitated, his mind swirling with doubt and disbelief. He had just endured a conversation with Moses that shook the very foundation of his world. The elderly man's words echoed in his ears. "I was once like you, a skeptic convinced of my own invincibility. But loss has a way of teaching you what truly matters." Jake turned to face Moses, his brow furrowed in frustration. "You think you can just throw your past at me and make me believe? What happened to you doesn't change my reality. I've built my life on facts and logic." Moses stepped closer, his eyes piercing yet filled with compassion. "Logic has its place, Jake, but it is the heart that guides us through the storm. I lost my family because I refused to see the signs, to embrace the connections that bind us all. I was too proud to admit that I needed help." Jake felt a twinge of unease at the older man's admission. "So what? You think I should just start believing because you did? That's not how it works." "No," Moses replied, a hint of sadness in his voice. "You must discover it for yourself. You have a choice, Jake. You can continue to live in isolation, dismissing everything as coincidence, or you can open your heart to the possibility that there's more to life than what you can see." Just as Jake was about to retort, the howling wind outside began to subside, the heavy rain transforming into a gentle patter on the church's roof. With each drop, he felt an inexplicable tension easing within him. The dim light filtering through the stained glass windows seemed to brighten, casting a warm glow around the room. "I've watched you, Jake," Moses continued, his voice steady and calm, "and I see the pain behind your bravado. You're scared of being vulnerable, of letting anyone in. But look around you. This place, this storm, they're all reminders of the beauty and fragility of life." Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. For the first time, he considered that perhaps his dismissive attitude was a mask for deeper fears. What if you're wrong? What if there's nothing beyond this life? Moses smiled softly, the kind of smile that held 1,000 stories. then you've lost nothing by opening your heart. But if you're right, think of all the moments you've missed by refusing to connect. The laughter, the love, the beauty of simply being alive. Tears unexpectedly filled Jake's eyes as he thought of the life he'd been living, a life marked by solitary nights and empty relationships. He had pushed away the people who cared for him, convinced they were weak for clinging to faith. But in this moment, with Moses's words enveloping him, he felt a crack in his armor. "I don't know how to change," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've built this whole persona around being invincible." Moses took a step closer, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Change begins with a single step, Jake. Acknowledging your fears is the first. The world outside is waiting for you to see it differently, but you must be willing to let go of the past." Jake closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the old man's hand. He envisioned the world outside the church, his friends, Sarah, the laughter of children playing in the park. He could almost hear their voices, their laughter intertwined with the music of life. With a shuddering breath, he opened his eyes and looked at Moses. "I want to try. I want to see the world differently. But how?" Moses nodded, his expression proud yet gentle. "Start by being present. Let go of your need to be right. Listen to those around you. They have stories that could change your life. And most importantly, don't be afraid to feel." Jake felt a rush of emotions overwhelm him, a mixture of fear and hope. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: vulnerability. "Thank you, Moses. I think I understand." As he stepped out of the old church, the world around him had transformed. The colors were more vibrant than he remembered, the greens of the leaves glistening with raindrops, the sky a brilliant blue. The laughter of children playing echoed in the distance, a sound he had long ignored. Jake's heart raced as he took in the scene before him. It was as if he had been given a new set of eyes, allowing him to see the beauty around him that he had previously dismissed. The air felt lighter, filled with possibilities. As he walked down the path, he spotted Sarah standing near the edge of the church, her smile radiant and warm. "Jake!" she called, her eyes sparkling with joy. "I was worried about you." He felt a rush of emotions, a mix of gratitude and longing. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I've been a fool, pushing away people who care about me." Her expression softened, and she stepped closer. "I've always believed there was more to you than what you showed. I'm glad you're here." In that moment, Jake realized the depth of her words. He had spent so long guarding himself, convinced that faith and vulnerability were weaknesses. But now, surrounded by the life he had overlooked, he understood that they were in fact the greatest strengths he could embrace. "I want to change, Sarah," he said, his voice earnest. "I want to be better, for myself and for the people I care about." She reached for his hand, and he felt the warmth of her touch seep into him. "It's never too late, Jake. Just take it one day at a time." As they stood together, a sense of connection blossomed between them, a bond forged through honesty and vulnerability. Jake knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. Looking back at the church, he understood that the mysterious letters he had received were not just coincidences, but a manifestation of his conscience. They were gentle nudges from Moses, guiding him towards a path he had long resisted. With Sarah by his side, Jake took his first step into a transformed world, ready to embrace faith and humility, ready to live a life filled with connection, laughter, and love. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time he felt hopeful. He was no longer alone. He had chosen to open his heart, and that made all the difference.